The Prime Minister gave broad strokes yesterday, but what's actually in the 2014-2015 budget? We'll take a look tonight. The F&M chairman calls the government's tax reform scheme lazy. This as 2 more die in shooting incidents overnight. Plus, the Ministry of Education to partner with Microsoft, and Atlanta celebrates its 20th anniversary. We've got those stories and more coming up tonight. I'm Dana Smith, and MB12 starts now. Topping news tonight, the Christie administration's fiscal roadmap for the next year was released yesterday, and despite a nearly 3-hour presentation by the Prime Minister in the House of Assembly, many are still wondering about the details of the government's revenue generation and spending plans. In this next report, Paige McCartney tells us where the money's coming from and where it's going.
Government anticipates it will generate about $2 billion in revenue over the next fiscal period, including the revenue it anticipates it will generate from value-added tax once it's implemented in January 2015. But government is still spending more than it's making as it prepares to make cuts to various government agencies and provide more funding to others. The big ticket item, of course, value-added tax. The government believes it can generate $150 million from that in 6 months. But even with that extra revenue, the government is still planning to run a nearly $350 million deficit. That number will likely end up higher, as for at least the past 5 years, the Bahamas has blown through its deficit projections. Still, it's a far cry from the over $500 million deficit the government ran up in its first year in office. The government projects boons in import and export duties and excise tax to the tune of an additional $54 million. It also projects it will collect an additional $36 million in property tax. To that end, the Christie administration plans to streamline property tax collection through the Department of Inland Review, the same department that will be responsible for collecting business license fees, projected at $126 million. Altogether, the government hopes it can collect $146 million in property tax, an area where debt collection has been historically abysmal. The budget also predicts it can collect up to $20 million in gaming tax in the next fiscal year, up from the $12 million it normally collects from casinos. The budget also forecasts an additional $16 million will be collected in departure tax. And just how does it plan on getting that extra money, especially in light of the fact that tourist arrivals declined this year? Well, in October, departure tax on air arrivals will go up to $29 per person. Sea departure tax will remain at $18. And the government is also likely banking on Bahar Mar, which opens in December, to make up that extra revenue. And those of you hoping that an aragonite boom might be in the works, don't get your hopes up. The government projects it will collect $49,850 from the aragonite royalties, the same as this year. While proceeds from borrowing, also counted as revenue, are projected at around $380 million. By the end of the next fiscal year, the Christie administration will have borrowed at least $1.5 billion. But the administration promises the borrowing is on a downward trend. Now let's talk about spending. Among those who got a budget bump this year are the police force, $2 million extra. The Defense Force, about $18 million extra. The Office of the Attorney General and the Court of Appeal both get a $1 million plus increase. Foreign Affairs gets more than $1 million extra next cycle. Immigration gets $1 million more. Finance officials have also said there will be an increase in social assistance programs to help the poor deal with the negative impact of that, but the recurrent side doesn't show that increase. Environmental Health Services gets an additional $5 million, and tourism will get around $9 million in additional money. And then there's the Ministry of Grand Bahama, whose function is at times unclear. The Ministry for Grand Bahama gets a nearly $9 million increase. But for what? Well, there's a $1.2 million increase for salaries for contract workers. On top of that, there's a $4.7 million increase for electricity and a $1.7 million increase for water. We reached out to Dr. Michael Darville, the minister for Grand Bahama, to ask him how this $9 million extra dollars will be specifically used, but we didn't get him up to airtime. The Agricultural School and BAIC combined will get a $4 million increase. The Antiquities and Monuments Corporation will get a $1 million increase. Bahamas Air will get a $5 million cut. And the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas won't get any increase this year. But the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture will get a nearly $6 million capital expenditure increase. If you want to take a look at the budget line items for yourself, you can do so at bahamas.gov.bs. For MB12, I'm Paige McCartney.
Government is asking Parliament to sign off on another round of borrowing. As we said, this time they need some $343 million to sustain operations through the next fiscal year. That makes at least $1.4 billion borrowed by the Christie administration since it took office in 2012. But State Finance Minister Michael Halkitis noted the $343 million is down from the $465 million borrowed in the 2013-2014 budget and the more than $600 million borrowed in the 2012-2013 budget. Well, Free National Movement Chairman Darren Cash says the government is trying to balance its budget on the backs of the Bahamian people with its new tax scheme. The Prime Minister announced yesterday government would introduce value-added tax in January 2015 at a rate of 7.5%, but that customs duty rates will remain the same for the first year of the new tax regime. Cash said this is a lazy way for government to get a quick fix.
Not being sufficiently well considered, not being strong enough to reduce customs duties, there's no question will impose hardships on large numbers of average, ordinary Bahamians. And we're not satisfied that is the right thing to do. It seems as though this is a halfway lazy approach that the Prime Minister is taking. They ought to have been a lot more deliberate.
In fact, Cash says the new tax structure will do the opposite of what government intends in generating more revenue. He said government is taking a high-caliber gamble that may very well end in less consumers spending money.
We suspect that just in looking at the numbers, a lower level of consumer confidence and demand will be there because people are not going to be willing to spend more money knowing that these costs include duty and value-added tax. By his own admission, the Prime Minister has spoken to a low level of demand and business activity. That's why his revenue numbers weren't what they expected them to be. Because people know that every dollar is going to generate less returns for them, the suspicion is that people are going to spend less, and by definition, government's going to generate fewer income because, again, just knowing that every dollar spent takes more money out of your pocket, people are going to be reluctant to spend.
Immediately following yesterday's announcement, F&M members of Parliament were asked about the opposition's alternative to VAT, but East Grand Bahama Member of Parliament Peter Turnquest told reporters the opposition isn't obligated to put forth an alternative. Cash said too much has been made of the lack of a specific alternative. He said with the completion of several studies on tax reform, the country is only just now at a place where there is enough credible and legitimate information. Before now, he said it would have all just been speculation.
We are now at a point where you have a good, strong body of options available, well-considered options available. And this is the point when a responsible opposition then looks at all of that broad range of information and then says, based on the work that was done, based on our analysis of it, this is what we think may be the best option. And so this is just now the point where people have enough credible information.
Cash added that the January 2015 implementation date is still very aggressive because he does not believe it gives enough time for exhaustive debate on the best form of taxation. However, Cash says implementation by that date is not impossible. Other opposition members have expressed concern about what they call the double taxation that will accompany the new tax regime. F&M Deputy Leader Loretta Butler Turner blasted the government's VAT plan yesterday.
Once the government starts getting revenue from both streams, border tax and the VAT, my concern would be that there's a caveat in there that's going to put a time frame on how long the 7.5% would be in effect. Because if they start, as they will have to decrease the border tax, they may want to then just exponentially increase that VAT tax in less than a year to make up for those two streams of revenue they're going to be getting in the first instance. That for me is going to be a major concern in terms of the cost of living in the Bahamas.
The opposition also voiced concerns about the country's World Trade Organization ascension. St. Anne's MP Hubert Chipman questioned how the government's customs duty plan will work when the government signs on to the WTO. He said the government seems reluctant to reduce customs duties, which is a prerequisite for WTO membership.
And what we heard today is no reduction. It's basically a double taxation, like the deputy said. So I don't know how we're going to sign on to the WTO with the existing tax structure as far as customs duties are concerned. So we have to address those things. I was hoping that he would say come January the 1st that the customs duty would be lowered at that particular time. I don't know the dates for the sign off on the WTO, but I know the Minister of Financial Services has been doing a lot of work in that area. So when are we going to get some relief from the double taxation?
The murder count continues to climb as two men were shot within an hour of one another between last night and this morning. The first murder took place on Pratt's Lane off Rupert Dean Lane around 11:20 last night. Police said the victim, who has been identified as Sean Lightfoot, 21, was shot twice in the head as he exited a vehicle.
This male came here, and as he approached in his vehicle and about to exit, he was accosted by we believe, a lone male who produced a handgun, discharging several shots in his direction, fatally wounding him. The assailants then was able to make good their escape into the bushes and leave this area.
Lightfoot was found lying next to the vehicle with the keys in one hand and cash in the other. Police said the latest murder took place around midnight on Thursday on Odell Street off East Street. Rolls said around 6 a.m. a woman who lives in the area came outside to throw away her trash when she discovered the man's body. He also had a gunshot wound to the head.
Started around midnight this morning, last night. Persons reported hearing gunshots in this area between Odell Corner and Gibbs Corner. We believe that would have been around the time when this incident happened. This is only about 100 feet from where the homicide took place a couple of days ago on Odell Corner. And so we appeal to persons who may have information regards to this latest homicide to reach out to us.
Rolls said it's too early to tell if it was a retaliatory killing. This latest victim was killed about 100 feet from where Kenneth Milford, 24, who was recently released from prison after beating a murder charge, was killed earlier this week. Roll said police are investigating whether the two are connected. Roll also confirmed that the deceased is from Freeport but lives in the area and was wearing an electronic monitoring device when he was killed. However, Roll said that doesn't mean there's a fault with the monitoring system.
Yes, I believe the system is effective. Them wearing the monitoring device, I don't know that has anything to do with them being murdered. Okay. We were able to track him. We were able to track him. There was no issue because I believe he lived in this area. So as long as they're in their exclusion zone, then there's no need for alarm. They wouldn't raise an alarm with that. It's only if, for example, he was outside of that zone for a period of time, then they would notify us. And they've been doing a pretty good job in reaching to the police within minutes.
These murders bring the count for 2014 to 54. When NB12 returns, the U.S. Department of State has released another crime and safety report, plus Atlanta celebrates a major milestone.